Layla sat in her wheelchair just outside the entrance of her cozy coffee shop, Morning Breath, nestled on a quiet street in Savannah, Georgia. The clock had struck 9 in the evening, and the humid air of late August 2022 clung to her skin like a second layer. Her hands rested gently on her 7-month pregnant belly, the weight of it a constant reminder of the life growing inside her. She had spent the day rolling between tables, serving customers her famous peach cobbler and steaming cups of coffee, her smile masking the exhaustion that gnawed at her bones. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the pavement slick and glistening under the soft glow of the streetlights. She waited for her husband, Caleb, who had promised to pick her up after closing time. Her wheelchair creaked slightly as she shifted her position, the metal frame cool against her palms despite the muggy night. The shop's sign swayed faintly in the breeze, its painted letters catching the light in a way that made them seem alive, a beacon of the dream she had fought so hard to build. She glanced down the street, her eyes straining to catch the familiar headlights of Caleb's pickup truck. Minutes ticked by, stretching into what felt like hours, and a flicker of unease began to coil in her chest. She brushed it aside, telling herself he was just delayed by traffic or a last-minute errand. Her fingers traced small circles over her stomach, a habit she had picked up to soothe both herself and the baby when the day grew long. Finally, a vehicle turned the corner, its engine rumbling low and steady. Relief washed over her as she recognized the shape of Caleb's truck, its dark blue paint scratched from years of use. She adjusted her position, ready to roll forward and meet him, but something stopped her cold. The passenger window was down, and in the dim light, she caught a glimpse of another figure beside him, Sarah, her business partner. Layla's heart thudded harder, a sudden tightness gripping her throat. Caleb stepped out, his tall frame casting a shadow that stretched across the wet pavement. He moved with purpose, but not toward her. Instead, he circled to the back of the truck, popped open the tailgate, and pulled out her overnight bag, the one she kept packed with essentials for late nights at the shop. He tossed it onto the sidewalk with a thud, the sound sharp and final in the stillness of the night. Water from a nearby puddle seeped into the fabric, darkening it instantly. Layla's breath caught as she watched him, her mind racing to make sense of the scene unfolding before her. Sarah leaned out of the passenger window, her silhouette sharp against the truck's interior light. Even from a distance, Layla could see the curve of a smirk on her face, a glint of triumph in her eyes that sent a shiver down Layla's spine. Caleb didn't look at her, not once. He climbed back into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and gunned the engine. The truck peeled away, tires squealing faintly against the damp asphalt, leaving a trail of exhaust that hung heavy in the air. Red taillights blinked once, twice, then vanished around the corner, swallowed by the night. Layla sat frozen, raindrops beginning to fall again, tapping softly against the awning above her. The bag lay abandoned at her feet, a crumpled symbol of everything she thought she knew. Her hands trembled as they gripped the armrests of her wheelchair, the reality sinking in like a stone in her gut. Caleb, the man she had trusted with her heart and her future, had left her there. Sarah, the friend she had welcomed into her business, had been part of it. They hadn't just abandoned her, they had planned this. The shop behind her, once a sanctuary of warmth and pride, now felt like a hollow shell, its locked door a barrier she couldn't cross. She reached for her phone, but the screen stayed dark, its battery drained from a day of use. Panic crept up her spine, mingling with the ache in her lower back that had worsened over the past hour. She tried to roll her chair closer to the awning, seeking shelter, but the wheels caught in a shallow puddle, spinning uselessly against the uneven ground. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, the weight of her pregnancy pressing down harder with every passing second. She was alone, stranded on a street she had once ruled with her charm and grit. The rain picked up, a steady patter now, soaking her hair and shoulders, trickling down her face to mix with the tears she refused to let fall. She wouldn't cry, not yet. But as the night deepened and the silence grew louder, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a cruel rejection. It was a calculated move, a first step in a game she hadn't known she was playing. Unseen by her, a figure lingered across the street, half hidden in the shadow of a sagging oak tree. His eyes tracked the truck's departure, then settled on Layla, watching her struggle with a quiet intensity. He adjusted the brim of his worn cap, rainwater dripping from its edge, and took a step closer, unnoticed in the storm. Layla's world had just shattered, but she didn't know that the pieces were already starting to shift, guided by a hand she hadn't yet met. The night stretched on, heavy with secrets, and the rain kept falling, washing away the last traces of the life she thought she'd had. 5 years before that rainy night in August 2022, Layla had been a nobody, a 23-year-old waitress hustling in a greasy diner on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia. She wore her ambition like armor, dreaming of a life beyond stained aprons and sticky tabletops, a life where she could build something of her own. By 28, she had turned that dream into reality, opening Morning Breath, a quaint coffee shop on a cobblestone street near the riverfront. Her hands, once calloused from scrubbing dishes, now kneaded dough for peach cobblers that drew crowds from across the city, their sweet aroma mingling with the rich scent of freshly brewed coffee. Locals whispered her name with pride, calling her the heart of Savannah's morning rush, a woman who turned grit into gold. She had poured every ounce of herself into the shop, every late night sketching menus, every early morning haggling with suppliers, every smile offered to a stranger who became a regular. The wooden floors bore the scuff marks of her determination, the walls glowed with the warmth of her vision, and the little bell above the door chimed her triumph with every customer's arrival. Caleb had entered her life like a storm breaking a drought, a 30-year-old accountant with broad shoulders and a disarming grin, meeting her one humid evening at a bar near Forsyth Park in 2018. He had spotted her nursing a lemonade, her laughter cutting through the chatter, and slid into the seat beside her with an ease that felt like fate. He offered numbers when she needed them, crunching budgets, securing loans, turning her scribbled ideas into a business plan that worked. Within a year, they were married in a small ceremony under the live oaks of a local garden, Spanish moss draping their vows in a delicate shroud. She trusted him completely, leaning on his steady presence as the coffee shop grew from a risky venture into a thriving hub. Sarah came next, a friend from her college days at Savannah State, re-entering Layla's orbit in 2019 with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. She had studied business while Layla took art classes, their paths crossing in late-night study sessions fueled by cheap coffee and cheaper dreams. Sarah proposed a partnership promising to handle marketing and expansion while Layla focused on the soul of the place, the food, the feel, the family it fostered. Together, they turned Morning Breath into a name that echoed beyond Savannah, a gem that sparkled in the humid haze of the South. Layla saw them as her anchors, the husband who steadied her and the friend who pushed her forward, a trio bound by love and ambition. 2 years before that fateful night, everything had changed in an instant, a moment that severed her past from her future with brutal precision. It happened in May 2020, a sweltering afternoon when the air conditioner in the shop had groaned its last breath. Layla had been alone, restocking supplies in the narrow basement beneath the coffee shop, a space cramped with shelves and shadows. She had balanced on a rickety stepladder, reaching for a heavy box of coffee beans on the top shelf, her arms straining under the weight. The ladder wobbled, a warning she ignored in her rush, and then it gave way entirely, tipping her backward in a chaotic tumble of wood and metal. She hit the concrete floor hard, the box crashing beside her, its contents spilling like dark tears across the ground. Pain exploded up her spine, sharp and relentless, stealing her breath as she lay crumpled among the wreckage. She tried to move, to call out, but her legs refused to obey, lying still and useless beneath her. Hours passed before a delivery driver found her, his shouts echoing up the stairs as he dialed for help. The diagnosis came swiftly at the hospital: fractured vertebrae, a spinal injury that left her paralyzed from the waist down, a permanent mark of that single misstep. She spent weeks in a sterile room, staring at ceilings while machines beeped and doctors murmured, her world shrinking to the space between hope and despair. Caleb had been there at first, holding her hand through the haze of painkillers, his face etched with worry as he promised they'd get through it together. He wheeled her out of the hospital in July 2020, her new reality strapped into a chair that felt like both a lifeline and a cage. The coffee shop waited, its doors closed during her recovery, but she refused to let it die. She returned in August, adapting to a new rhythm, rolling instead of walking, baking from a lower counter, smiling through the ache that never fully left her. Sarah stepped up too, managing the books and suppliers, her efficiency a balm to Layla's fractured confidence. Customers came back, drawn by her resilience, and the shop thrived again, a testament to her refusal to break. But beneath the surface, cracks had begun to form, invisible to Layla as she rebuilt her life around her disability. Caleb's promises grew thinner, his eyes drifting when he thought she wasn't looking, his hands less steady when he helped her from chair to bed. Sarah's visits became brisk, her smiles clipped, her excuses piling up like unpaid bills. Layla didn't see it then, didn't want to see it, the way her dream, her family, her trust were slipping through her fingers, piece by piece, into the hands of those she loved most. She had fallen from a ladder, but the real fall, the one that would shatter everything, was still to come, waiting in the shadows of that rainy night 2 years later. Layla's pregnancy had begun to show in February 2022, a quiet swell beneath her clothes that marked the start of her 7th month by August. She felt the baby kick for the first time one crisp morning while rolling through the coffee shop, a flutter that brought a smile to her lips despite the persistent ache in her spine. Morning Breath remained her lifeline, a sanctuary where she could still be the woman she'd built herself into even if her body betrayed her daily since that fall 2 years ago. She worked tirelessly, her wheelchair gliding between tables, her hands steady as she poured coffee and plated cobbler. The shop buzzed with life, its wooden walls soaked in the scent of cinnamon and roasted beans, its windows fogged with the breath of Savannah's summer heat. Customers filled the seats, their chatter a steady hum, drawn by the warmth she infused into every corner of the place. But the weight of her condition pressed harder with each passing week, exhaustion creeping into her bones, her lower back throbbing from hours spent upright in the chair. She ignored it, pushing through the pain, driven by the promise of a child who would inherit her strength, her shop, her story. Caleb had noticed the pregnancy too, his eyes lingering on her belly with a flicker of something she couldn't quite read, pride, perhaps, or something darker. He'd been her rock once, but now his presence felt uneven, his attention slipping away like sand through her fingers. Sarah had changed as well, her visits to the shop growing sporadic, her once constant energy replaced by a distracted edge. She'd linger near the counter, tapping at her phone, her excuses piling up, meetings, calls, errands that kept her away for hours. Layla began to notice the cracks in late June when the daily receipts started coming up short, $10 here, $20 there, amounts too small to accuse but too consistent to ignore. She checked the books herself one humid evening, her fingers tracing the numbers, her brow furrowing as she found gaps where there should have been profit. She stumbled across a stack of invoices in early July, tucked in Sarah's desk drawer, payments to suppliers she didn't recognize, names and amounts that didn't match her records. Her stomach tightened, the baby shifting inside her as if sensing her unease, but she pushed the thought aside, unwilling to suspect the worst. One night in mid-July, she found a letter crumpled in Caleb's jacket pocket while sorting laundry, a handwritten note in Sarah's tight scrawl detailing a transfer of her share of Morning Breath signed over to a shell company she'd never heard of. Her hands shook as she read it, the paper crinkling under her grip, her breath catching in her throat. She confronted Caleb the next morning, her voice steady despite the storm inside her, asking him about the letter while he sipped coffee at their kitchen table. He brushed it off with a shrug, his eyes avoiding hers, claiming it was a precaution, a way to secure their future once the baby arrived. Layla wanted to believe him, her heart clinging to the man she'd married, the one who'd stood by her after the fall. She let it go, nodding as he kissed her forehead, his lips cool against her skin, her doubts buried under the weight of her trust. But the doubts grew louder in August, whispers she couldn't silence as Caleb and Sarah began disappearing together, their absences stretching longer, their explanations thinner. She'd catch them on the phone late at night, their voices low, cutting off when she rolled into the room. She saw the way they stood too close one afternoon in the shop, Sarah's hand brushing Caleb's arm, a laugh shared that excluded her entirely. Her chest tightened, the baby kicking harder as if urging her to see what she'd been avoiding. By mid-August, she found a bank statement hidden under a stack of napkins in the back office, showing withdrawals she hadn't authorized, hundreds of dollars siphoned into an account she didn't know. Her fingers traced the numbers, her mind racing, piecing together a truth she didn't want to face. She stayed late one night, the shop empty, the air thick with humidity, and dug through Sarah's files, finding a contract dated July 31st, her ownership stake in the coffee shop reduced to nothing, reassigned to Sarah with Caleb's signature as witness. The betrayal sank into her like poison, slow and searing, burning away the last of her illusions. Layla sat there in the dim light, her wheelchair still, her hands resting on her belly as the baby moved restlessly inside her. She'd built this place with love, with trust, and they'd turned it into a weapon against her, a plan she hadn't seen coming. Her pregnancy had made her vulnerable, slowing her down, tying her to the chair and the shop while they moved in the shadows. She realized then that they'd been waiting, biding their time, using her condition to tighten their grip. The night Caleb promised to pick her up, August 25th, had been their final play, a move she'd mistaken for routine until the truck pulled up with Sarah inside. She'd sensed the shift, the coldness in the air, but hadn't grasped its depth until he tossed her bag and drove away. Layla had been blind, lulled by loyalty, by the hope that her family wouldn't fracture under the weight of her disability and her unborn child. Now, the poison of their betrayal coursed through her, bitter and undeniable, a venom she'd have to purge to survive. She wouldn't let it end her, not her baby, not her dream. The shop stood silent around her, a witness to her fall, but also a promise of what she could still reclaim if only she could find the strength to fight back. Rain lashed against Layla's face as she sat stranded on the sidewalk outside Morning Breath on that fateful night of August 25, 2022. Her wheelchair rocked slightly in the wind, its wheels mired in a deepening puddle, the cold water seeping into her shoes and chilling her motionless legs. Her hands gripped the armrests, knuckles pale from the effort as she tried to maneuver the chair toward the awning for shelter. The effort was futile, the uneven pavement and her 7-month pregnant belly conspiring to keep her pinned in place, exposed to the storm's fury. Her overnight bag lay sodden beside her, its contents, a spare sweater, a bottle of water, a pack of crackers, slowly soaking through, a pitiful lifeline discarded by Caleb's betrayal. She reached for her phone, fingers fumbling in the dark, only to find the screen blank, its battery drained hours ago. Panic clawed at her chest, her breath shallow and ragged, the weight of her situation pressing down like the rain itself. She was alone, abandoned by her husband and her business partner, with no way to call for help and nowhere to go in the heart of Savannah's storm-swept night. The street lay empty, the usual hum of late-night traffic silenced by the downpour, the glow of streetlights blurred into hazy halos. She shivered, her thin jacket no match for the wet chill, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. How long had Caleb and Sarah planned this, and what came next? Then a shadow moved across the street, a figure emerging from beneath the dripping branches of an ancient oak tree. He was tall and lean, his frame hunched against the rain, a worn cap pulled low over his eyes, shielding his face from her view. Layla tensed, her heart thudding harder, unsure if this was a threat or a chance at salvation. The figure hesitated, then stepped closer, his boots splashing through puddles as he crossed the deserted road, his pace deliberate but unhurried. As he drew near, the faint light from the shop's awning caught his features, rugged, lined with years of hard living, yet softened by a quiet kindness in his hazel eyes. She recognized him then. Trevor, a former coffee supplier for Morning Breath, a man Sarah had fired 6 months earlier in February 2022. Trevor had been a fixture in her early days, delivering beans from a small roastery outside Savannah, his truck rattling up to the back door every Tuesday morning. He'd linger sometimes, sharing stories of his years as a cook before a knee injury sidelined him, his voice gruff but warm as he praised her cobbler. Sarah had cut him loose, calling him unreliable after a late delivery caused by a flat tire, a decision Layla had questioned but never overturned. Now he stood before her, rain dripping from his cap, his gaze steady as it took in her predicament. He had seen it all, Caleb's truck pulling up, Sarah's smirk, the bag hitting the pavement, the taillights vanishing into the night. He'd lingered across the street, hidden by the storm, watching the betrayal unfold with a growing knot in his gut, unable to walk away. Trevor stepped closer, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his frayed jacket, his posture unthreatening yet resolute. He knelt beside her wheelchair, rain soaking his knees, and assessed the situation, the stuck wheels, her trembling hands, the bag sinking into the muck. Without a word, he gripped the chair's handles and tugged, freeing it from the puddle with a grunt of effort, the wheels rolling smoothly onto drier ground. He picked up her bag, slinging it over his shoulder, its weight negligible to his wiry strength. Layla watched him, her breath steadying, a flicker of hope piercing the despair that had gripped her moments before. Trevor straightened, his cap tipping back slightly, revealing the scar that curved along his jaw, a relic of a kitchen accident he'd once mentioned in passing. He gestured toward a beat-up sedan parked half a block away, its faded green paint barely visible through the rain. She nodded, too weary to question his intentions, trusting the instinct that had carried her this far. Trevor pushed her chair down the sidewalk, the wheels humming against the whetstone, his steps sure despite the slick surface. He opened the passenger door of his car, a rusting relic from the 90s, and maneuvered her inside with a practiced ease that suggested he'd done this before. Her wheelchair folded with a clatter, stowed in the trunk alongside sacks of coffee beans that filled the air with a familiar, grounding scent. He climbed into the driver's seat, rain dripping from his jacket onto the cracked leather, and started the engine with a low rumble. They drove in silence through Savannah's rain-swept streets, the wipers slapping a steady rhythm against the windshield, the city's lights smearing into streaks of gold and red. Layla clutched her belly, the baby shifting inside her, as if sensing the shift in her fate. Trevor took her to a small house on the edge of town, a single-story shack near the Wilmington River, its paint peeling and its porch sagging but its windows glowing with a soft, inviting light. He parked in the gravel driveway, the crunch of tires a stark contrast to the storm's roar. He retrieved her chair, unfolded it beside the car, and helped her out, his hands gentle but firm as he guided her up a makeshift ramp to the porch. Inside, the air was warm, tinged with the smell of wood smoke and old books, a stark contrast to the chaos she'd left behind. Trevor set her bag on a scarred wooden table, its surface cluttered with receipts and a half-empty mug, and turned on a lamp that cast a golden glow across the room. He disappeared into a tiny kitchen, returning with a chipped mug of tea, steam curling from its surface. Layla took it, her hands warming around the ceramic, the heat seeping into her chilled fingers as she sat by a threadbare couch. Trevor pulled up a stool, his cap now off, revealing thinning hair streaked with gray, his face etched with a quiet resolve. He had watched her build Morning Breath from the ground up, admired her tenacity, and resented Sarah's cold dismissal of him months ago. That night, he'd been delivering to a nearby diner when he'd spotted Caleb's truck, his curiosity turning to horror as the scene unfolded. Trevor had kept something from his time with the shop, ledger pages he'd photocopied, receipts he'd stashed, snippets of overheard conversations between Sarah and Caleb that hinted at their scheme. He'd held on to them, unsure why, until now. He reached into a drawer, pulling out a worn envelope stuffed with papers, and slid it across the table to Layla, his eyes meeting hers with unspoken understanding. She opened it, her fingers trembling as she skimmed the contents, proof of theft, of deceit, of a plan to erase her from the life she'd built. Layla's resolve hardened, the tea cooling in her hands as she absorbed the weight of Trevor's gift. She wasn't alone anymore. This man from her past, cast aside like she had been, had stepped from the shadows to pull her back from the edge. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows, but inside, a fire sparked in Layla's chest, fueled by the evidence before her and the ally beside her. She'd been betrayed, abandoned, but salvation had found her in the unlikeliest of forms, and with it, the chance to fight back. Layla spent the next 3 days hidden in Trevor's modest shack by the Wilmington River, the storm's echoes fading into a humid stillness by August 28, 2022. She sat by the window each morning, her wheelchair angled to catch the faint sunlight filtering through the pines, her 7-month pregnant belly a constant weight against her resolve. Trevor moved quietly around her, his presence a steady comfort as he brewed coffee and sorted through his cluttered table, pulling out more scraps of evidence he'd kept from his time at Morning Breath. He laid out photocopied ledger pages from January 2022, showing inflated supply costs that never reached the shop's shelves. He produced receipts from deliveries he'd made, dates stamped in faded ink, March 3rd, April 10th, May 15th, each paired with bank records he'd swiped from Sarah's trash, revealing payments funneled to a ghost account. Layla's hands trembled as she traced the numbers, her mind piecing together the theft that had bled her business dry. Trevor had overheard fragments too, whispers between Caleb and Sarah during his last weeks at the shop, boasts of a future without her dragging us down, words he'd scribbled on a napkin and tucked away. She read them now, her breath catching at the cruelty, the baby kicking as if in protest against the betrayal. She knew Caleb and Sarah were still at Morning Breath, reveling in their victory, serving her customers, counting her money, assuming she'd crumbled under the weight of their abandonment. The thought fueled her, a slow burn that steadied her shaking hands and sharpened her focus. On August 29th, Layla made a call from Trevor's old rotary phone, its cord tangled from years of use, reaching out to Marla Evans, a former professor from Savannah State who'd become a lawyer known for her fierce defense of the wronged. Marla had taught her business law in 2016, her no-nonsense lectures leaving an imprint Layla never forgot. Marla arrived that afternoon, her silver sedan pulling into the gravel drive, her graying hair pulled tight in a bun, her eyes sharp behind thick glasses. She stepped into the shack, her briefcase thudding onto the table, and surveyed the evidence with a practiced gaze, nodding as Layla recounted the night of August 25th. Together, they built a case over the next 12 hours, Marla's pen scratching across legal pads, Trevor fetching coffee, Layla sifting through the papers with a clarity born of rage. They cataloged the forged invoices, the siphoned funds, the contract that stripped her ownership, each piece of brick in the wall they'd raise against her betrayers. By August 30th, they had a draft of charges of embezzlement, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, typed up on Marla's laptop, the hum of its fan filling the quiet room. Layla's fingers hovered over the keys as she added her statement, her words stark and unyielding, detailing Caleb's abandonment and Sarah's complicity. Marla filed the lawsuit that evening, driving to the Chatham County Courthouse under a sky bruised with clouds, submitting the papers just before the clerk's office closed at 5. The legal machine began to turn, a summons issued for Caleb and Sarah set to land in their hands by September 1st. Layla stayed out of sight, her wheelchair parked by Trevor's couch, her mind racing with the next steps as she sipped tea that grew cold in her grip. She imagined Caleb's smirk faltering, Sarah's confidence cracking when the sheriff's deputy knocked on the shop's door with the court papers. Trevor had one more ace up his sleeve, a secret he'd held until the case was solid, revealing it on the morning of August 31st as they ate stale toast at his table. He'd installed a cheap security camera in the shop's storage room back in January 2022, a precaution after a break-in scare, its feed saved to a dusty hard drive he'd kept in his closet. He plugged it into Marla's laptop when she returned that day, the screen flickering to life with grainy footage from July and August, Sarah counting cash after hours, stuffing bills into her purse, Caleb laughing as he locked the front door with a new key. Layla stared, her pulse pounding, the baby shifting as the truth played out in silent frames. Marla grinned, a rare crack in her stern facade as she copied the files, labeling them Exhibit A through C, each clip a nail in the coffin of Caleb and Sarah's scheme. The footage showed them plotting in the shop she'd built, their arrogance captured in pixelated clarity, a gift Trevor had preserved without knowing its full weight. Layla felt the tide turning, her despair giving way to a fierce determination, her hands resting on her belly as she envisioned the courtroom battle ahead. She'd been left for broken, but she was far from it, her mind sharp, her allies steadfast, her evidence ironclad. Marla spent September 1st refining the case, adding the video to the filings, her calls to the courthouse ensuring the judge saw the urgency, emergency motions to freeze the shop's accounts, to bar Caleb and Sarah from selling it off. Layla watched her work, marveling at the precision, the baby's kicks a rhythm to her growing hope. Trevor drove to the shop that night, parking a block away, his cap low as he watched through binoculars from his sedan, reporting back that Caleb and Sarah were still there, oblivious, laughing behind the counter. Layla smiled faintly, a predator's calm settling over her, knowing their ignorance was her weapon. She slept fitfully on Trevor's couch, the hard drive humming beside her, dreams of justice mingling with the ache in her spine and the baby's restless movements. September 2nd dawned gray and heavy, the air thick with anticipation, the summons likely in their hands by now. Layla rolled to the window, her chair creaking, and stared at the river, its sluggish flow mirroring her patience. She'd waited, planned, struck when they least expected it. Caleb and Sarah had underestimated her, seen her pregnancy and disability as weaknesses, but they'd misjudged her strength. Marla called at noon, her voice clipped with satisfaction. The judge had granted a temporary injunction, locking the shop's finances, scheduling a hearing for September 10th. Layla exhaled, a weight lifting, the baby settling as if sensing the shift. Trevor brewed more coffee, his hands steady as he poured, his quiet pride a mirror to her own. They'd turned the tables, taken back the narrative, set the stage for her reclaiming what was hers. She held the mug, its warmth grounding her, her eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the river. The counterattack was complete, the trap sprung, and now she waited for the fallout, her resolve as unyielding as the oak that had sheltered Trevor that first night. Caleb and Sarah had lit the fuse of their own destruction, and Layla, with her unlikely savior, would watch it burn. The days after the summons hit, Caleb and Sarah stretched into a tense limbo, but by September 10, 2022, the storm that had loomed over Layla broke into a reckoning at the Chatham County Courthouse in Savannah. She rolled into the courtroom that morning, her wheelchair guided by Trevor, her 8-month pregnant belly a quiet force beneath her simple navy dress, her eyes fixed on the judge's bench with unyielding resolve. Marla stood beside her, her briefcase open on the table, papers neatly stacked, ledgers, bank statements, the damning contract, and the security footage that had sealed their fate. The room buzzed with murmurs as Caleb and Sarah entered, their faces tight with defiance, their lawyer a wiry man in a cheap suit who shuffled nervously behind them. The hearing unfolded swiftly, the judge, a stern woman with gray curls and a no-nonsense gaze, listening as Marla presented the case, her voice cutting through the air with precision. She laid out the evidence piece by piece, the forged invoices from March, the stolen cash from July, the ownership transfer dated July 31st, each document a thread in the web Caleb and Sarah had spun. The footage played on a small screen, grainy but undeniable, Sarah pocketing money on August 3rd, Caleb mocking Layla's trust on August 15th, their laughter echoing in the silent courtroom. Layla watched, her hands clasped over her belly, the baby kicking as if in rhythm with her vindication. Caleb tried to stand, his posture rigid, his hands gesturing as if to explain, but the judge silenced him with a sharp glance, her gavel poised like a warning. Sarah sat still, her smirk gone, her eyes darting to the exits as the weight of their actions crashed down around them. The verdict came on September 12th, delivered in a clipped tone that left no room for doubt, guilty of embezzlement, fraud, and breach of contract, with Caleb facing additional charges for abandonment under Georgia law. The judge ordered the shop returned to Layla, its accounts unfrozen, and sentenced Caleb to 3 years in prison, Sarah to 18 months, their fines steep enough to strip them bare. Caleb's shoulders slumped as deputies cuffed him, his eyes avoiding Layla's, his bravado shattered as he was led from the room. Sarah followed, her head bowed, her steps faltering, a shadow of the woman who'd smirked from the truck window weeks before. Layla left the courthouse that afternoon, the sun breaking through the clouds, its light warm against her face as Trevor pushed her chair to his sedan. She felt the baby shift, a gentle nudge of life that steadied her, a promise that the darkness was behind her. On September 20th, she gave birth at Memorial Hospital in Savannah, a girl she named Hope, born at 7 pounds 3 ounces, her cries piercing the sterile room on a quiet Tuesday morning. Layla held her, tears slipping down her cheeks, her wheelchair beside the bed, Trevor waiting in the hall with a shy smile. She returned to Morning Breath on October 1st, the shop's doors reopened under her sole command, its wooden floors polished anew, its air thick with the scent of coffee and fresh cobbler. Customers trickled in, then flooded, drawn by whispers of her triumph, their faces familiar and new, their voices a chorus of welcome. Trevor stayed on, no longer just a supplier but a partner, his name added to the lease on October 5th, his quiet strength a pillar she leaned on as she rebuilt. He manned the counter, his hands steady as he poured coffee, his presence a balm to the wounds Caleb and Sarah had left. Layla adapted the shop to her life, a lower counter installed by October 10th, a ramp at the back door finished by October 15th, her wheelchair gliding smoothly through the space she'd reclaimed. Hope slept in a sling against her chest, her tiny breaths a rhythm to the shop's reborn pulse. By November 1st, Morning Breath thrived, its tables full, its walls adorned with photos of Savannah's riverfront, a testament to Layla's roots and resilience. She rolled between customers, her smile genuine, her hands deft as she served, the ache in her spine dulled by purpose. The city buzzed with her story, locals recounting the trial, the betrayal, the comeback, their pride in her a quiet hum that filled her days. She hired a new baker on November 10th, a young woman with quick hands, freeing her to focus on Hope and the business she'd fought to save. Caleb's absence left a void, but not a wound. His letters from prison arrived by November 15th, unopened, tossed into a drawer she never touched. Sarah vanished from Savannah, rumors placing her in Atlanta, her name erased from the shop's history like dust swept from its floors. Layla marked Hope's 1-month birthday on October 20th with a small gathering, Trevor grilling burgers in the shack's backyard, Marla bringing a cake, the river glinting under a harvest moon. She watched her daughter sleep, her tiny fist curled, and felt a peace she hadn't known since before the fall. The shop's profits climbed by December 1st, enough to pay off old debts, to fund a small expansion, a patio planned for spring 2023, a dream she'd once shared with Caleb, now hers alone. She sketched the plans herself, her pencil steady, her vision clear. Trevor became her constant, his shack a second home where she'd sit by the river on quiet nights, Hope cradled in her lap, the water's flow a mirror to her healing. He'd tinker with his sedan, his hands stained with grease, his stories of the past weaving into her present. Layla rolled through Morning Breath on December 10th, the holiday rush in full swing, lights strung above the counter, the bell jingling with every arrival. She paused by the window, watching snowflakes, rare for Savannah, dust the street, a fleeting magic that matched the light in her chest. Hope cooed against her, her eyes wide, and Layla traced her daughter's cheek, the storm of August a distant memory, its shadows burned away by the life she'd rebuilt. The shop stood as her fortress, its warmth the defiance of the cold that had tried to claim her. She'd lost a husband, a friend, a piece of herself to that rainy night, but she'd gained more, Hope, Trevor, a strength forged in fire. The light after the storm wasn't just survival, it was triumph, a glow that radiated from her wheelchair, her daughter, her dream reborn. Savannah embraced her, its streets alive with her story, its people her shield as she rolled forward, unbroken, unstoppable, a mother and a maker of mornings. The year ended on December 31st, Morning Breath aglow, Layla at its heart, the future hers to shape.